Good afternoon, folks. This is the technical preview of native vSAN data protection. We are really excited to be showing this today. It's something that we've been working for a number of months. Data protection is a really important topic for vSAN and at VMware overall. So I'm glad that you guys could join us. We'll have about 50 minutes of presentation as well as demos, and we budgeted about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Couple of housekeeping items. This recording will be available for you maybe a week or so after the session today. You're welcome to take pictures, but I just wanted to mention that all the slides and the demos are going to be available for you, right, for watching later on. The other thing I do want to mention is that this is a tech preview. So because it's a tech preview and this is a public session, I will not be able to share timelines with you. But if you guys have an NDA, I'm happy to have a separate conversation with you under NDA and share the timelines with you, right? So that's an important thing. And then for questions, we would like you to ask a lot of questions, but please hold them towards the end, and please do use the mic. So with that, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Shubhan Lakapragada. I've been at VMware for about 5 years now. I lead data protection for vSAN and vSphere overall. So not only this native data protection that we're building into vSAN, but also overall vSphere data protection solutions like SRM, vSphere replication, as well as our backup ecosystem. And I have my colleague here, Michael. Do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hello, my name is Michael Ng. I also work in the storage and availability business unit as a product manager. My main focus is availability and data protection features. And I've been working on this as a PM for the last year. We're excited to finally see that tech preview phase. All
right. So let's get started. This is an important slide because this is a tech preview. It's a standard disclaimer. This capability that we are showing here, it's under development. So please keep that in mind. The features are subject to change, and as I mentioned, I will not be able to share timelines with you in this public forum, but we can do that separately. So in terms of agenda, what we have for today is I'll kick it off with a quick overview of VMware's HCI solution. I think many of you may be familiar with vSAN and HCI overall, but let's spend a few minutes talking about that. And then I also want to highlight all the data resiliency capabilities that are available for vSAN, right? Not only from a traditional backup and DR perspective, but also what are the built-in capabilities in vSAN to deal with things like disk failures and host failures and so on, right? So there's really a comprehensive approach that we are taking for data resiliency. Then I'll quickly introduce the native data protection, what we want to do, right, long term, right, the overall vision for native data protection. And then I'll hand it off to Michael, who will walk through a demo and the deep dive of the various capabilities that we have in progress. And we'll have a good 10-15 minutes or so for Q&A. We'll stick around as well for further discussions. So with that, let's dive right in. Actually, let me ask, how many of you are using vSAN today, right, in some shape or form? Okay, so many of you, right? So I think this is going to be very familiar to you, right? The modernization of data center is being fueled by HCI, primarily because HCI offers these three benefits, right? By leveraging the server cost economics with standardized components with x86 hardware, HCI solutions are able to bring down the cost, right? The total cost of ownership for infrastructure. And with this, ability to add and grow capacity, right, as you need, you have greater agility and scale. And with HCI solutions, you also get, not only the convergence of compute and storage, you also get a converged management, right, experience. So that is what really makes it easier to deploy and operate at scale, right? So those are really the three benefits that are driving the increased adoption of HCI. And from when we talk about HCI from VMware perspective, it's really a combination of these three things. vSphere, right, the industry standard hypervisor that many of you have been using for many, many years. vSAN, right, which is the native storage. and vCenter that gives you the unified management capability. And VMware HCI solution powered by vSAN gives you this broadest deployment choices, right? You can buy vSAN through what we call vSAN ready nodes. These are from various OEM vendors, configurations that are certified to work with vSAN. There's also a fully integrated appliance model with VxRail from our partners Dell EMC. There's also VMware Cloud Foundation, right? If you guys attended the general session on Monday, you've heard that VMware Cloud Foundation is in version 2.2, right? VMware Cloud Foundation allows you to build entire rack scale infrastructure, right? And it has, in addition to vSphere, vSAN, vCenter, it also adds in NSX, right? So you get this complete infrastructure in a fully integrated manner, whether you're using a private cloud or we're seeing even service providers, right, using VCF. And public clouds, the big news here at VMworld is VMware Cloud on AWS, VMC. So the key thing here is vSAN is the underlying storage that is powering VMC, right? So all the capabilities that we are building into vSAN, whether it is native data protection or data at rest encryption that we already released in 6.6, our goal is to make all those capabilities also be available in VMware Cloud on AWS. And then, of course, you can also get this HCI solution through managed service providers as well. And for those of you who have been using vSphere and vCenter for many, many years, VMware HCI is really just a step away, right? There's no risk of you switching to a new vendor, unlike other HCI solutions, because with vSAN, we give you this broad choice of using your favorite or your existing server vendor, right? Many of the server vendors offer this vSAN ready node, so you don't have to switch server vendors. And there's no risk of learning and using a new management tool. All the management of vSAN, including the data protection that we're going to be previewing here, is all going to be built into vCenter, right? Things like health monitoring, not only the provisioning, but also health monitoring, recovery workflows. Everything's going to be through your familiar vCenter. And there's no risk of new software installation. vSAN is literally just, you can think of it as a feature from a feature of vSphere, right? From a software packaging perspective, there's no additional software that you need to install. And there's no risk of you having to go and find new ecosystem vendors, right? Any solution that works with vSphere, most of them will also work with vSAN, especially when it comes to data protection. So it's one of the key things that we've also announced last week and this week is that vSAN is now reaching 10,000 customers. It's a huge milestone for us, and some of the logos here, these are the VMworld speakers, vSAN customers who are speaking at this VMworld, right? And the reason for this tremendous growth is the things that I mentioned in the previous slide, right? The wide server choice that we give you with VMware HCI solutions, the simplicity and familiarity that you already have with vSphere and vCenter. So recently, about 2-3 months ago, we commissioned a survey of our existing vSAN users by working with TechValidate. And we really wanted to get real data on how customers are using vSAN today, right? And in the early days of vSAN, of course, the primary use cases were VDI, remote offices, maybe test and dev. But I would say over the last 18 months, 2 years, customers are deploying business critical apps on vSAN, right? vSAN is already in the data centers for many customers. And as you can see here, 65% of the survey respondents told us that they are using vSAN to deploy business critical applications. So with so much adoption of vSAN for production data centers, business critical applications, data protection has been really a significant investment area for us, right? And we've done two things, right? We are working with our existing data protection and backup ecosystem, while we are also building this native capabilities, right? So I'll talk about both of those. So in this next section, let's take a quick look at all the data resiliency capabilities that vSAN has, right? Now, any good storage system, of course, needs to have this built-in capability to deal with, disk failures, node failures, and so on, right? Now, in vSAN, it's really simple to configure the protection, right, to deal with these kind of failures. We have, within the vSAN policy-based framework, there's a way for you to choose the failure tolerance method and things like, failures to tolerate, right? That gives you the ability to define the level of protection that you want to deal with, node level failures or disk level failures. And we also have this concept of fault domains, right, which gives you this ability to define and group vSAN nodes into racks, right? So that gives you this protection against whole rack level failures as well, right? And the next level of protection that we have is continuous availability, right? So for many customers that want this, synchronous replication of data, right, and automated recovery of workloads if one of the sites were to go down, they want this concept of stretch clusters, right? Now, stretch clusters are not new, right? Many traditional storage vendors have had stretch clusters. vSAN has also the stretch cluster ability for at least few releases. In fact, in the last release, we made additional enhancements to our stretch clusters with ability to do 2 levels of protection. I'm quickly going over these things. The focus of this session is not these topics. There are dedicated sessions at this VMworld, as well as in past VMworlds, where we went in depth on how vSAN gives you these capabilities, right? Now, when it comes to disaster recovery, right, you can, of course, use vSphere replication and site recovery manager with vSAN. The nice thing about this is, you can use vSAN as either the production or a storage solution for your DR side, or both, right? You can mix and match. vSphere replication supports heterogeneous replication from vSAN, either as a source or target to any storage. And for the last one here is protection from data corruption, right? Or in the same category, there's also operational procedures, right? Where you might have things like, hey, I want to take a database, right, instance, and I want to create multiple copies of that, right? So this is what traditionally has been covered by data protection and backup solutions. We do have a wide ecosystem of data protection partners out there that support data protection with vSAN. I'll talk about it in the next slide. We have been encouraging backup vendors to create additional documentation, additional best practice guides to give customers, right, that additional level of assurance and guidance on how to use these backup solutions with vSAN, right? But the real topic for today's session is this tech preview, right? And our goal is to build native data protection into vSAN as a alternative, right, for customers. Instead of using your best of breed existing data protection solution, in future you can switch to this native data protection. Now, I get asked a lot of questions on how do you recommend, right, which one do we choose? Of course, the first thing is we don't have this native data protection yet generally available, right? It's only tech preview. For all those customers that are deploying vSAN for production applications, you should, of course, use your existing backup solutions or vSphere replication and SRM for disaster recovery. And even when we have this native data protection, they're going to be slowly adding functionality, right? And we're hearing from customers, for some customers, snapshot and snapshot-based data protection is really the way to go. That's how they've been achieving data protection with traditional storage. That's what we are designing this native data protection for, right? But there will, of course, be some customers who say, hey, I have a heterogeneous environment, I've got vSAN alongside other types of storage, and I do want to have this centralized backup solution. And we're not taking our eye away from that. We'll continue to support the backup ecosystem and continue to work with our different vendors to enhance that as well, right? So it's really a two-pronged approach. It's really a choice that you guys have. If you want native capability and snapshots is really the way you want to do data protection, you can use this native data protection, right? All right, so I'm going to skip through these slides. These are there, for you to review when you see the recording and the slides. I do want to mention here that SRM and vSphere replication can be used even with vSAN stretch clusters, right? So it really gives you this three-side protection. You can have vSAN stretch clusters across 2 campus sites or 2 metro distance sites, and then have DR protection to a third site, right? So, or you can have just a 2-site approach where you have vSAN in one site and then SRM, vSphere replication replicating to a second DR site. So a quick recap of the broad ecosystem that vSAN has today for data protection. As I was mentioning before, we created this new certification program called VMware Ready for vSAN. There's 2 categories within it, data protection and file services. And our goal with this really was to encourage the vendor ecosystem, the third-party ecosystem, to go ahead and create that additional level of documentation and additional testing, right, to give customers that additional confidence really that these particular solutions are well tested with every vSAN feature, right, whether it's data at rest encryption, stretch clusters, and so on. But I do want to mention that any vSphere compatible data protection solution will work just fine with vSAN because the APIs are exactly the same. The VADP APIs work the same way whether it's vSAN or third party, right? With the first category, you just get that additional documentation and best practice guides and so on. All right, so let's switch gears and now talk about the native data protection, right? And again, as I was mentioning before, for many customers, snapshots is really the way they want to do data protection, right? With traditional image-based backups, there's issues like long backup windows. Restores might take a long time because there's actual copying of data, right? Whereas with this approach, we want to give you that simple, low RTO recovery, right? Plus a consolidated approach to do local protection as well as remote replication, right? So with this native data protection, what you will be able to do, right, is on your primary data center, your production vSAN cluster, right, you can set up policies just like you do today for vSAN, where you specify storage policy attributes, like failure tolerance method, failures to tolerate, stripe width, and so on. There will be a new option now to specify the data protection attributes of the policy, right? So you can say, for these sets of VMs, I want to take snapshots every half hour, right? Every 1 hour, whatever you need to do for those class of VMs. And you can define policies that also say, specify the retention, right? Take snapshots every 30 minutes and retain the last 8 directly on the production vSAN cluster. So that gives you 4 hours worth of retention, right? So that's what we are calling local protection, right? And with the same policy-based framework, you can also specify archival and replication parameters, right? So you can say, these sets of VMs are really important. I do want to replicate them to my DR side, right, as well as taking local snapshots. So you can say, it takes snapshots every 30 minutes, and let's say once in 4 hours, replicate them to a DR site, right? I'm just using these as examples, right? I'll tell you in a little while what is the exact RPO that we're going to be supporting. So with one consolidated solution that is based on snapshots, you can have this local protection as well as remote protection, right? And for remote protection, you can choose to send these snapshots to a archival storage, like a secondary storage, cost-effective secondary storage, like NAS arrays, data domain, cloud object storage, right? Any S3 compliant object storage, which will become your secondary storage. Or you can send these snapshots, replicate the snapshots to a second vSAN cluster, right? In another site, or maybe even in the same site, right? So that's the overall vision of what we want to do with this native data protection. And we'll spend a lot more time in the deep dive and the demo walking through how this will actually work. Now, of course, in order to build this, right, you need to have really good snapshots. And I think it's no secret that VMware snapshots so far have not been good, right, from a performance perspective. But the first step that we are doing with this solution is really investing in building next-gen snapshot technology, right? And the way it differs from the existing snapshot is it's using a more modern approach, right? It's using redirect on write technology rather than copy on write, which is what we have today. So with this, right, from snapshot to snapshot, right, based on your RPO, the change blocks are written in a new place in the same snapshot file, and we're doing pointer manipulation and keeping the metadata in an intelligent way, right, to keep track of the changes, right? So that's what is allowing us to give this better performance and scale, right? Our design goal with this technology is to be able to support up to 100 snapshots per VM, right, with very low performance degradation, right? Now, we don't have exact numbers yet. Some of the engineers that are building this are actually here. We're still developing this and testing this, right? But the design goals are as low performance impact as possible and scale of up to 100 snapshots per VM. So this technology is being developed on vSAN, right, first. But the technology itself is not really tied to vSAN, but our initial development is all going to be tied to vSAN, right? Potentially down the road, we do want to expand this to vSphere overall, but that would be a much longer effort. So that's a quick introduction of vSAN native data protection and this next-gen snapshot technology. I'm going to now hand it off to Michael, who will provide a deep dive and demo.
Hi, guys. So let's deep dive into this local data protection use case that Shubhan mentioned, right? Again, this is local data protection. We call it that because what we're doing is we're creating snapshots of VMs, and we're storing the snapshots locally in primary vSAN storage, right? So you might ask me, why would you want to do that? Because you just invested heavily on your all-flash array, and I really want to run primary workloads. Why am I using my storage for snapshots? It's because since we embed the snapshots in your primary storage, you can recover your VMs really quickly, right? What we do is the snapshots are on vSAN storage. We can create clones of the snapshots at recovery time. And that is almost an instantaneous low RTO recovery process. You see in the demo, it's a demo environment, but I'll virtually recover the VM within 2 minutes, right? We can talk more details of what that means as a clone when we walk through the demo. But it does give us a really good RTO when you're recovering your VMs, right? The snapshots are also optionally application consistent. What that means is that when you create a snapshot of the VM, it talks to the VM and talks to the applications within it, prepares the applications for data protection and backup, right? So depends on the application, but if it's a database, it will make sure the database is transactionally consistent. It flushes all the I/O from memory, puts it into the database files, and then we snap it. The advantage of that is that when you recover, for example, a database, all of the transactions have been flushed, the logs have been truncated. So when you recover the VM, you restart the database doesn't need to replay any logs, right? All of that is done for you at sort of snapshot creation time, and recovery is still really quick. Right? So you may want to do that for some of your applications. And we support VSS writer integration. So any kind of Microsoft stack that has VSS writer integration, like SQL Server, Exchange, will work with this. For Unix-based platforms, there is no VSS, obviously. And so what we do is you can write custom scripts and hook that on with your VM tools and hook that on to like some pre-steps for the snapshot creation. Then you can QS your Oracle database, for example, write some RMAN scripts, right? Prepare it for backup, and then let us create the snapshot, and then thaw out the Oracle database when you're done, and then the snapshot is taken, right? So also with all these really scalable snapshots, you can leverage them because you've already created them for backups, right? So you can also then recover the VMs as clones for any test dev kind of use cases you have. If your developers want to use your production VM but just want to test a patch, for example, right? You can quickly recover it from your snapshot protection and then use it as a development instance, right? And then delete it as quickly as you finish. And so everything is tightly integrated into vSphere, right? And the experience of using this, configuring it, and managing it is very familiar to anyone that's used vSAN and vSphere before. If you've created a storage-based policy for vSAN, defining behaviors for data protection like retention and RPO behavior is exactly how you would do things for vSAN behavior, like failures to tolerate and RAID 1 and RAID 5 behavior for your storage. So everything is tightly integrated. So we talked about all of that storage creation and storage management in SPVM. Let's walk through a demo to see exactly what that looks like and how simple it is. So this is the H5 client. I don't know if a lot of people have seen this or not, but this is going to be the new H5 vSphere Web UI. It's very clean, it's very modern, it's very new. And all we have to do is really just create a policy, right? And that's what we'll do in this video. Oops, sorry. Let's try that again. So we're going to create a policy. This is just the policy view in vSphere UI. And here we are actually, sorry, let me do that again. Creating the policy, we just call it local protection, no very original name. Basically, we're just going to define rules for snapshots that get stored in vSAN. We'll skip past all the non-data protection rules, and now we go to the data protection settings, right? And here is where you can define behaviors for your data protection. So things like RPO and retention. So we can define the RPO frequency. The minimum RPO we support is 5 minutes. Goes up to 24 hours, right? And you can select whichever option you want, and then the snapshots get created in that frequency, right? Here you can also define if you want to do snapshot application consistency, right? You can snapshot the snapshots application consistent-wise, every snapshot, or an interval base. Like every 5th snapshot you create an application consistent snapshot. Retention is very simple as well. All you have to do is specify how many snapshots you want to retain. And it'll always just maintain like a window of most recent snapshots. So for example, if you retain 10 snapshots, it'll always just cycle through that window, right? You can retain as many as you want depending on how much storage you have on your vSAN cluster, right? I also want to point out this small little text over here. That's actually a live view that changes, right? So if, for example, if you changed it to 10 minutes, right? What it will show is that it will show you have an RPO of 10 minutes. In the bottom, it will reflect based on whatever retention you have. So if you had 10 snapshots, basically that's 200 minutes of protection window that you have that you can go back and forth on with the number of snapshots you have. So let's advance on the video a little bit. And it'll just basically start configuring it, as I was telling you. And you go ahead and finish off and hit finish. Basically here is sort of a preview or before you actually hit commit, right? It'll show you all the settings that you've set before. I've just basically chose a very simple policy, 5-minute RPO, with no application consistent snapshots. Hit finish, and then the policy gets created. And so that's a very simple policy creation, right? With that policy, you can then attach VMs. So how do you attach VMs? What I mean by attaching VMs is now you can actually protect VMs with that policy that you've set for vSAN local protection. And there are many ways that you can actually protect a VM with vSAN data protection. You can create a VM with an existing storage policy that has data protection rules assigned to it. You can edit a VM, so right-click on a VM and say edit storage policy, select a storage policy that you've just created those rules, or you can script it with Power CLI commands. If you have a lot of VMs that you want to tie these data protection attributes to, go ahead and script it. You can associate multi-VMs with a single policy that has rules. So now we've protected the VM. And once you've actually committed that protection and said, hey, this VM is going to use this policy, snapshots will start getting created for that VM based on whatever frequency or retention you create. So if you set 10 minutes, then every 10 minutes, vSAN data protection will start creating those snapshots. And so what does the snapshot catalog view look like now? So we've been creating snapshots for a while. How do you see what the snapshots are, and how do you know which snapshot to actually recover from? All of that you can also see in the vSphere web UI, right? So here I'm browsing to one of the VMs that I've protected, and that's called VM9. And I'm going to pause it here. This is the detailed view of a particular VM in vSphere, not very different from your normal view, except that in the vSAN node over there, there's an actual data protection node, right? Which then shows you all your snapshots that you have available as recovery points. And now this view shows you all the snapshots that you've previously created with the SLAs that you've defined. It shows you the different kinds. Showan was talking about snapshots to primary storage, snapshots to secondary storage like archival. So here, if you define those archival rules, you'll see those archive snapshots there as well. Notice the nice filters that we have on the left there. If you only care about the most recent ones, you can filter just to that view and get to what you want. And you can also select on a particular snapshot that you care about, and you can see more details. So this is how you'll know if I recover from this particular snapshot, it'll take me to that point in time back again. This tells you whether or not there's any application snapshot consistency tied to it and what the actual size is. So you notice the size is actually pretty small. This is a test environment, so your mileage may vary on your environment. And that's basically it, right? So that's how you see the catalog of snapshots. And so now you have snapshots and you have a catalog. What do you do with it, right? So I'm going to demo next sort of almost a real-life scenario where a VM goes down and we recover from it. So I thought it'd be kind of fun if we tried to be real, right? So let's say I work for an e-commerce company, and I have a website that I sell different kind of goods. My SQL Server instance is managing all my transactions. So it's taking in transactions live, and customers are making purchases. Unfortunately, my data center gets hit by a big malware attack, for example. And this is a really intense virus, right? It decides to spread over my data center and starts deleting files maliciously. But thankfully, I've been protecting that VM, that SQL Server VM, with snapshots. And so I can easily revert back to a point in time before the malware, clean up the malware from my environment, and get back up and running. So that's what I'm going to show you guys next, the recovery process. All right, so I'm going to show you how I'm going to corrupt the VM. Obviously, I don't have this malicious software running anywhere, but what I'm actually going to do, this is the VM. It's a Windows 2008 server VM running SQL Server 2008. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to shut down SQL Server, and I'm just going to manually delete the files. So I'm going to pretend I'm the virus, right? And I just wiped out your data files on your SQL Server instance, and this is what happens. So I stop the service. manually delete the files with Windows Explorer. And when I do that, you can guess what happens to SQL Server, right? If you don't have any database data files, SQL Server doesn't start. At this point, your boss is yelling at you, your business is not taking any transactions, and you're losing money by the minute, right? So what do? Fortunately, you've actually created some snapshots of it. So now we recover the VM from a snapshot, right? And we do that by going back to the web GUI. So that's the SQL Server VM that I have. It's still running, but SQL is down. And notice the nice right-click context menu we have here that brings up the wizard, right? So it's a quick convenience feature that we have. And the first thing you'll see, this is the actual recovery wizard, right? And the first thing you'll see, step 1 is pick your recovery point. This is a quick table that shows you all the different points in time that you have for recovery purposes and where they are. All of them are local snapshots for now, all on vSAN. Video control is not correct. And those are the points in time again. And we select one of them, and that's the one before the malware attack occurred. And this is the next step in the recovery wizard. So this video is not showing you a piece of the screen on top, but it actually allows you to create the VM and tell it what name you want the VM to be. So that implies that we're actually creating a new VM and cloning the old point in time back into the VM, right? Other options you have, you can specify what storage policy that the VM will have once it gets recovered. So you can click on that drop-down box and it'll show you all the storage policies available to you in vCenter for this VM. And then you can recover based on whatever attributes you want. You can pick the default vSAN storage policy or any other vSAN storage policy you have for different storage attributes. You can power on the VM if you want after the restore. That can be useful as a convenience time-saving factor. And then there's this third option here, right? So by default, we'll always clone the VM from the snapshot. It's a really quick way of doing a recovery. What it isn't is it's not a fully independent VM. It's not running all the storage that it's using, all the VMDKs is based off a snapshot. So it's tied to that snapshot. That's how we can clone it really quickly. But if you want it to be fully independent and you break the tie from that snapshot, all you have to do is click on that button, right? That radio button, and it'll say restore fully independent VM. What will happen is you'll recover the VM. It'll still clone it, but in the background, it's actually going to break that tie for you and then provision the storage in the background for you. So you still get the same quick recovery, but you don't have to promote the VM later. So if anyone have used link clones before, that's what you do. You create a link clone, and then you promote the VM once you're ready to break that tie from a snapshot, right? So what this will do is it saves you that step from actually doing that actual promote, right? So we move forward to the next step. And the next step, we specify location attributes, right? You can tell vSAN data protection where you want to recover the VM in vCenter, which folder you want it to be, right? And you can also tell it which compute resource, which resource pool you want the VM to actually end up on, to have different characteristics for resources. And you can tell it which virtual switch you want the VM to connect to as well. If you don't want it to connect to the original one, then you can specify and customize. All of this will default to what it was protected with. So if it was with VM switch 1, the default will be this. You just hit next and it will continue, right? One of the nice things with the actual network customization is that you can also tell it to not start networking when it's finished recovering. And what that will do is basically not start up all the network services on the NICs and disconnect the VM from your network. That's what that is, that option there. And so if you want to make any sort of IP customizations, you can do it there by disconnecting. It'll recover as disconnected. And then it's powered on. You can log on to it using vSphere, the web console, and then change networking and then power it on. Then it'll be connected to your network. That's what it's doing. Do not connect. Hit OK. Hit next. And then this is the final confirmation. Shows you all the attributes that you want. You hit finish. And now the recovery is actually happening. Right? As you can see, right? I'm going to pause this just to show some items here. The actual recovery is happening, and monitoring the recovery job is just a task in vCenter, right? You can see all of that at the bottom over there. And I've highlighted just the recovery time, okay? We started at 1:01:29, and I'm just going to hit play, and you'll see the steps start scrolling down, the actual recovery process. The first step is restoring the VM. And it's already moved on to the next step, which is registering the VM. So the restore is actually progressing really quickly. And we are up to a point where we're reconfiguring the VM, and we'll reach the stage where it's ready for power on, right? And so I'm going to pause here real quick. And so at the point where it's ready for power on, I consider the VM to be recovered. And basically what you're seeing here is the recovery takes about a minute, which is pretty impressive for me. I come from traditional backup world where RTOs of 1 minute is like amazing, right? Like if you can recover your physical server in like 6 hours, 4 hours, that's already really great. 1 minute recovery is almost like magic. So that's a really nice part of the power of recovering with snapshots. And so basically at this point in time, the VM is recovered, and let's browse the VM to see what's happening. So we're going to actually use the vSphere Web UI, and we're going to launch a remote console session. And as you can see, that's the actual VM that we recovered from. Launch that session. And Windows is booting up. It thinks that it was interrupted, but actually it's just recovering from a snapshot, right? And I'm going to jump in time here just to show you the boot up, because the boot up takes really long. And we've already been able to boot up the VM, and we've logged on successfully, right? So the VM is running absolutely fine now. Let's see what's happening with SQL Server. We bring up SQL Server Management Studio. The test is that SQL Server is running. So basically that means that you recovered from your malware attack. You've restored back to a point in time that is before the attack, and SQL Server can run because your data files are there. Let's just see if it's there. It should be, because SQL Server is running. The data folder is there, and all your data files for your SQL Server has been recovered. So at this point, your business is back up and running. You're taking out transactions, and you recovered the VM, right? And your boss is just giving you a week vacation because you saved the business. That's a really nice thing. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Monitoring aspect, right? So we've seen all this stuff about management, provisioning. How do you monitor stuff, right? And so this is the vSAN virtual objects view. If you're familiar with vSAN, this is existing views, right? But we've retrofitted and we've enhanced it for data protection. So over here, if you look at virtual objects, this is my favorite view for monitoring, because we've just put a very simple data protection box on the right there, and it gives you a very high-level view of data protection for all the objects in your vSAN infrastructure, in terms of vSAN data protection. If you can filter it for VMs, and so that's what I did. I filtered it for VMs, and I can instantly see which VMs are healthy from a data protection standpoint, which VMs are not configured, which means they're not protected. So you may want to configure a policy to protect those and associate that to a policy. And if there are any unknown states, right, you can drill down more. And what you'll see, that this is just the lower view, but you can see a list of VMs, what the data protection status is. We have a nice column there that shows that, which ones are not been configured and which ones are healthy, right? So a lot more detail. We can have even more detail now. Let's say you have errors, right? And we've also integrated ourselves into the vSAN health checks. Right? We've created custom health checks for data protection, and these are like our preliminary ones in development, right? One of my favorite ones is this object data protection health overview, right? With this, you'll be able to see all the actual individual objects in vSAN and what they mean in terms of data protection. Have they been configured or not? If you're not able to take application quiescent snapshots, whether they're healthy, if the VM is not accessible. That's really important to know, right? If from a data protection standpoint in vSAN. And another example, another health check that we have is, so this is the vSAN data protection service. All of that runs on every single host in your cluster, right? And it's critical that they're running, or not you might have some issues. And so this is showing you all of that information.
So Michael, I do want to add one other point here is, because these snapshots are native to vSAN, any other data services that you've configured for vSAN in the same policy, let's say you have data reduction, right, with erasure coding, or at the cluster level you turned on vSAN encryption, the snapshots are also going to get the same characteristic, right? The snapshots are also going to get deduplicated, compressed, and encrypted, right? So that's one of the key benefits of this being a native feature of vSAN.
Right. And that's basically all I had in terms of demo. I think it's a really good feature that allows you to configure everything natively with vSAN and very quick recoveries and also built-in monitoring features. Now we move on to any Q&A that we have at this point.
Yeah, please do come up to the mic.
You just answered one of my questions regarding
You can ask another one.
the snapshots. So I take it, because all these snapshots are taking place, I'm assuming you really have to take into account your rate of change, because you're taking so many on so many VMs over a period of time. Your rate of change on your SQL, if you have a large transaction where you're doing a lot of writes, that's not going to, those snapshots are going to grow.
That's right. I mean, the snapshot, I mean, you're really deciding your RPO, right? Your SLA that you want for your particular VMs, right? And, rate of change really, you don't have to factor that in, right, when you try to decide your RPO. Now, I think it does yeah.
You'll have to factor it into sizing out your vSAN.
That's right. That's right, yeah.
The other question I had is if you are doing some of these deployments and you're spinning up these snapshots as secondary VMs, are you looking to implement any tie-ins with the SRM automation to do renames, re-IPs, or possibly even tie into NSX to redeploy the rules that those systems might have?
Yeah, so that's under consideration for sure, especially when we support native replication, right? So what we've shown here today is really the new snapshot technology, right? The policy-based configuration and local protection, right? So we didn't show this, but there will be in future, right, the ability to do cluster-to-cluster replication, right? Now, we do want to integrate that native replication with SRM, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like how SRM integrates with other third-party storage level replication, except here you wouldn't have to deal with SRAs and so on because it's all, VMware, right?
Yeah, it's more of, I was looking at more of inner data center, or
right.
Where you're restoring. You wouldn't be tying into SRM in that sense, but it's
integrated.
Or integrated.
That's right.
But with the stuff that with NSX and all the rules now and all that stuff, because you're able to restore it, it makes it a manual process without that integration.
Yes, makes sense. Yep. Okay.
I have two questions for you. The first one, I'm assuming that the quiescence method is only going to be provided by VMware tools. You're not writing a separate agent to provide that?
No, we're not writing a separate agent. It's embedded in the workflow, yeah.
And the second one is, will this support and affect, or how will it affect iSCSI target service?
So you mean today you're using vSAN iSCSI, right? And is your question whether we'll be able to take snapshots of that iSCSI target?
Yes, if the data protection will be extended to iSCSI targets. So,
in the initial releases, we are looking at it as a VM level thing, right? The protection policy is attached to the VM level. We do want to add, the ability to do protection at a VMDK level. We have other concepts like first-class disks. iSCSI target is another non-VM object that is in the consideration, right? Any other questions? Yeah. Not in the near term, right? And that's something actually we're debating, whether we should really go down to that level of recovery granularity. If you compare this solution with, let's say, third-party backup solution, right? Who've, over the years, they've added a lot of functionality, like file-level recovery, database-level recovery. We'll add more and more functionality, but we have to draw the line at some point. I would say file-level recovery is in the consideration list, but I think we get asked things like cluster-to-cluster replication, cloud archival, a lot more. Because for file-level recovery, you can always go into the VM and retrieve whatever files you need, right? That's how we are thinking about it, but yeah.
Is the archival or transition to secondary storage in the tech preview, or is that coming later?
It's not in the tech preview.
Okay. And so what about guidance when you're transitioning from, say, vSAN object level to a secondary storage in terms of what the storage requirements are for your secondary storage as you're pushing out to archive?
Yeah, I think we've discussed it internally. Like, do we provide any capacity planning guidance for the
Sizing
NFS data
tools,
store
yeah.
sizing? I think, there's a lot of things that we are considering. I mean, we have the vSAN sizer tool, right, that we need to enhance that to take into account the local protection and the new snapshot just for on cluster itself, right? For the, the capacity planning for the production vSAN cluster, you now have to take into account your data protection policy. So that's how we're we'll enhance the sizer tool. Now for the secondary storage target, I'll take that as a request, right? And we'll take it into consideration. Any other questions?
Log truncation for the application consistent backups.
Yep. That happens as natural part of the application consistent process, right? If the VSS writer supports that, like SQL Server will naturally do that when you create it for data protection. So yes, that will happen as part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Or if you can, please, yeah. Because I think they're recording it.
Yeah.
Or I can.
So my question is, with data protection and snapshots, I mean, typically I refer to them as not being a backup. It's, obviously something gets corrupted, it's great to be able to recover back. Is that what that's all this is? I mean, if I go in and I delete every VM in there, there's no way to get it back. The chain's gone with it. Am I clear on that?
If you move the snapshot, right, if you set up a policy and you say, I want to archive these snapshots, right, or to replicate to a second cluster or to the cloud, anything that is a second fault domain away from the production vSAN cluster, we will actually replicate the base disk as well, right? The first snapshot that gets, so you have a fully independent way to restore and recreate the VM, right? All that happens behind the scenes. When you set up the policy and you say, I want to archive these snapshots, right, to NFS cloud, or I want to replicate these snapshots to a second vSAN cluster, we know internally that it's going outside the production vSAN cluster fault domain, right? So behind the scenes, we'll replicate the base disk as well, right? So you'll be, if the whole vSAN cluster goes down, you can rebuild the VMs from NFS archival or cloud, right? So yeah, I think calling them snapshots is a little bit of misleading. We do want to give you the ability to recreate the VMs as well, right? By having base disk also copied. But that only happens the first time, right? Yeah.
In the future, will you have that option to replicate it locally?
You mean keep the snapshot if you don't, and then when you delete it, the snapshot stays? Is that what you're asking?
No, to replicate the base disk locally.
Oh.
Well, I mean, you could always clone the VM just like with the standard tools, right? You're saying you want to have the base disk also?
Yeah, locally. I think what you're trying to say is you're trying to say, like, if you want to be protected from the deletion using the local storage. Yeah, correct.
Right.
Yeah, okay. I mean, our thinking is that the way to do that is by archiving these snapshots to a second fault domain, like NFS and replication. But I hear you. I think you're saying, I want to be able to do the same thing locally as well, right? Okay, we'll take that request, right?
Because it's going to be a lot faster to restore.
Sure.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay, it's a good point.
Lower your failures to tolerate in vSAN and use that instead.
So this will protect you against exactly that, right? Like accidental deletion of a VM or something like that.
Right.
Okay, it's a good point. We'll take that as a request.
Will this be a no charge feature, or are we going to limit to a certain number of snapshots, and then if you want to go back,
We cannot talk about pricing and packaging. First of all, it's too early. Second, we can only do that under NDA. So I'm happy to, if you have an NDA, I'm happy to have a separate conversation about that. Any other questions?
Do you guys intend on opening this to partners to use the mechanisms you're using when you're using vSAN storage? So like if Veeam wants to take, if I don't want like my ERP system to snapshot in a regular method, are you going to open up this as a kind of storage snapshot platform for those vendors?
It's definitely under consideration, right? Capabilities like file level recovery, right? We can only do so much management and recovery workflows. But opening up the snapshots to third party, it's not a simple, we have a private API and we unhide it, right? It's not, there's actual effort involved in testing and making sure it works well. So you may not see that in the initial releases, right? But it is something that we have in mind, right? To work with, things like Commvault, IntelliSnap, or IntelliSnap, Veeam, and so on. Yep. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. There is actually a survey. Please do fill out the survey. It's really important for us to get your feedback on the session itself. Thank you.
Thank you.